You guys know what time it is. Iceberg time. Just like tier 1, I got this iceberg from Reddit user RebelPunk2077. Link to the iceberg and all the sources will be linked down below. I'll have chapters on this video just in case you don't want to hear about a particular person. You can skip to someone you find interesting, so you don't have to feel like you have to click off. And if you find yourself enjoying this content, please hit the like and subscribe button if you haven't already. Without further ado, let's dive right in. The Gardner Musuem Incident, guys. The Gardner Musuem Incident, guys, refers to when 13 works of art were stolen from the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston in 1990. Now, for some backstory. The Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum was constructed under the guidance of art collector Isabella Stewart Gardner, a leading American art collector in the early 20th century. Her museum first opened to the public in 1903, and Gardner added to this collection until her death in 1924. When she died, she left the museum $3.5 million, as well as instructions to do not alter the collection, as well as do not buy and sell from the collection, as well as the museum shouldn't really be altered that much. This will play an important part later. Because by the 1980s, the museum's funds were running a little low. The museum didn't have climate control or even a damn insurance policy and was severely lacking in building maintenance. After the FBI uncovered a plot in 1982 of a group of local criminals attempting to rob the museum, they suddenly found funds to then up their security. The security added was an improvement, but it was still lacking compared to what other museums had at the time. The security systems they put in at the time included 60 infrared motion sensors, a CCTV system with 4 cameras at the perimeter, and a few extra security guards. But remember, I did say it was lacking. I say that because there were no cameras put inside the building due to the Board of Trustees believing it would cost too much. Also, the only way the police could be called to the building was by a button under the security desk. And other museums at the time, though, had a fail-safe system which required the night watchman to call the police every hour to make sure everything was okay. By 1988, they had a security audit, and the audit said their security was up to par with other museums, but like I said, it could use some improvements. But because the museum was strapped for cash, and it was against Stewart Gardner's wishes for the major renovations, the Board of Trustees did not approve for any security enhancements. Now, onto the heist. On the early hours of March 18, 1990, 2 thieves dressed in police uniforms parked in a hatchback car near the entrance. It was St. Patrick's Day, and a few patrons who actually witnessed these thieves in the car just thought they were real cops. Inside the museum was 23-year-old Rick Abbott and 25-year-old Randy Heston. Abbott was the regular night guard, but this was Heston's first shift on night duty. Part of the security protocol was that one guard would make rounds around the museum to make sure everything was okay, while the second guard stayed back in the guard booth. This, once again, is because the guard booth had the button to alert authorities in case there was an emergency. Abbott, the nighttime regular, went on patrol first, with Heston staying back in the security booth. During Abbott's patrol, fire alarms went off in different rooms. However, Abbott could not locate any fire or smoke. Abbott returned to the security room and then turned off the fire alarm control panel due to him believing it was some sort of malfunction. He then went back on patrol, but before he did, he made a quick stop at the side entrance of the museum and then briefly opened the side door and then shut it again. He didn't tell Heston that he was doing this or why. Once Abbott completed his patrol at 1 a.m., it was Heston's turn. They swapped places. At 1:20 a.m., the thieves drove up to the side entrance and rang the buzzer, which connected them to Abbott in the security desk. Abbott could see them on the security camera, and they were wearing cop uniforms, so he just, thought they were cops. And the thieves explained that they were cops there to investigate a disturbance. Well, Abbott didn't report any disturbance, but he thought since it was St. Patty's Day, maybe someone had climbed over a fence and they just saw it and they were trying to investigate and help out. So he buzzed the thieves in at 1:24 a.m. Once they were in, they made their way to the security desk where Abbott was. And then they asked him, hey, is there anyone else in the building? Abbott told him that there was another guard on patrol, and so then they told him to radio him back and get him back to the desk. After that, Abbott noticed that the mustache on the taller gentleman seemed a little fake, but then the thief told him, hey, come out from behind that counter. You look like you have an arrest warrant out. So Abbott stepped away from the desk, which contained the only button for them to contact the authorities. Once he got out from behind there, the thieves then handcuffed him and placed him against a wall. Heston then soon arrived, but he was also handcuffed. And that's when these cops revealed that they were thieves, and they explained to them that they were robbing the place. The thieves wrapped duct tape around their eyes without asking for directions, led them to the basement where they were handcuffed to a steam pipe and a workbench. The thieves took the wallets from the guards, looked at their ID and examined them, and then threatened them. But then they told them, do not tell authorities anything and they would get a reward in about a year. It was now 1:35 a.m. It only took the thieves 15 minutes to subdue the guards. Infrared motion detectors tracked the thieves' movements throughout the museum. The first room they entered, the Dutch room on the second floor, did not have any steps recorded until 1:48 a.m. This was 13 minutes after they subdued the guards, possibly to ensure that the police were not alerted. As the thieves approached paintings in the Dutch room, a little alarm would go off. This alarm usually told, patrons that they were a little too close to the paintings. They smashed the hell out of them. At 1:51 a.m., one thief continued to work in the Dutch room, while another entered the short gallery, a narrow hallway on the opposite end of the second floor. Soon, the other thief then joined. The last stolen work was the chest to Tony from the blue room on the first floor. But even though something was stolen from the blue room, the motion detectors did not detect any motion within the blue room during the thieves' time in the building. The only footsteps that were recorded that night in the blue room, per the infrared sensors, was Abbott during the 2 times he passed through the gallery on his patrol earlier. The thieves then checked on the guards one more time before they left, making sure that they were comfortable. They then went to the security director's office and took the video cassette that had been recording on the closed circuit cameras, as well as all the data printouts from the motion detectors. But the movement data was also collected on hard drives, which they might not have known of because they didn't touch them. The thieves then proceeded to remove artwork from the museum, opening the side entrance doors once at 2:40 a.m. and then once at 2:45 a.m. The heist had only lasted 81 minutes. When the next guard shift came in the morning, they realized something was wrong whenever they couldn't get in contact with the security desk. They called the security director, who then came with his keys to unlock the building. They walked to the guard desk and saw that no one was there, so they immediately called the authorities. The cops got there, searched the museum, and found the guards still tied up in the basement. 13 works of art were stolen, and it's regarded as the most valuable museum robbery of all time. The FBI estimated that in 1990, this haul was worth $200 million. But then it was raised to $500 million by 2000. Some of the art dealers estimated the worth to be $600 million by the late 2000s. The mix of the items stolen puzzled the experts though. Some works of art were stolen were very, very valuable, while then the thieves would pass more valuable art to steal less valuable art as they were walking through. Because Gardner's will stated that nothing in her collection either be sold or bought, empty frames from the stolen paintings still hang in their respective spots throughout the museum as placeholders for their possible returns one day in the future. The museum raised a $1 million reward bounty for anyone who had any information. That was then raised to $5 million in 1997 and ultimately $10 million in 2017. The reward is for any information that leads directly to the recovery of either some or all the items, as long as they're in good condition. Federal prosecutors have also even said, whoever returns this will not be prosecuted. The statute of limitations expired in 1995, so the thieves, as well as anyone involved, would get away scot-free. Well, now that we know a little bit about the heist, who do the authorities think did it? Well, the FBI got involved immediately due to the possibility that the artworks could have crossed state lines and therefore would become a federal case. The authorities didn't have a lot of strong evidence such as, footprints or hair, but they had their theories. I'll go over the first one. Rick Abbott, the night security guard. Because of his suspicious behavior on the night of the theft, he was investigated early on. While on patrol, Abbott, remember I said, opened and closed the side door, which some believe were to signal the thieves that, hey, it's time to go. According to Abbott, he did this on a regular basis though. He said he was doing it to make sure the door was locked. However, one of Abbott's co-workers told journalists that if he was opening and closing the door like he says he does all the time to check it, that the managers would have seen it on their computer printouts and told him, don't do that. Also, the museum's motion detectors didn't detect any motion in the blue room during the 81 minutes of the heist in which the thieves were there. However, a piece of artwork was stolen from that room, and the only one who had motion in that room, per the detectors, was Abbott during his patrol. And what you're thinking, well, maybe the motion detectors were faulty or something. Well, several weeks after the theft, a security consultant examined the motion detector equipment and determined it was working. It was fine. The FBI released a security video from the museum the night before the theft in 2015, which showed Abbott buzzing in an unidentified man and having a conversation with him at the security desk. Abbott told investigators he didn't remember the incident, as well as he didn't recognize the man in the video. So the FBI turned to the public for help. Several former museum guards identified the stranger as Abbott's boss, the museum's deputy security chief. That's strange you wouldn't recognize him. Despite all this evidence, Abbott maintains his innocence, and the FBI agent in charge early on in the investigation concluded that the guards were too inept and foolish to commit the crime. Maybe we got the usual suspect situation going on here. Another possible suspect was Whitey Bulger, the leader of the Winter Hill Gang, was one of the most powerful crime bosses in Boston at the time. He claimed he did not organize this heist. In fact, he was kind of pissed about it. He sent out agents to find who caused the robbery because it was on his turf and he wanted to be paid tribute. Bulger's involvement was investigated by the FBI agent Thomas McShane. He concluded that Bulger's close ties to the Boston Police Department could explain how the thieves obtained legitimate police uniforms, or that real police were arranged to pull off the heist. Maybe those thieves were really caught. Bulger also had ties to the Irish Republican Army, or IRA, and the IRA's calling card was the bogus tripping of fire alarms prior to a heist, according to McShane. Both organizations had agents in Boston, and both had a history of pulling off art heists. However, McShane's investigation to Bulger and the IRA yielded no evidence linking them to the heist. Side note, there was also a letter written to the museum in 1994 from an anonymous author who claimed to be negotiating the return of some of the artwork. The author claimed that they were the middleman, and the thieves wanted the money to be sent to an offshore bank account to hide the identities of everyone involved. They told the museum to place a coded message in the Boston Globe, and so they did, but the anonymous author never wrote back. But in 2013, the FBI reported with a high degree of confidence that they knew who the thieves were, and that they were a part of a criminal organization based in the New England area. Then in 2015, the FBI stated that these two thieves were deceased, but did not give up names of individuals that they were thought responsible, only that they were a part of the Merlino gang. Merlino's gang had cased the museum in 1981 and had plans to rob it, but the FBI found out about this and tipped off the museum. Remember, I mentioned that earlier. There are three names for the Merlino gang that come up when you research this topic. They are Robert Garente, Robert Gentile, and David Turner. The final suspect, though, however, I'm going to cover today is Bobby Donati. Robert Donati, aka Bobby Donati, aka Bobby D, is what I'm going to call him, was a member of another crime family before his death in 1991. His involvement in the Gardner theft was suspected after notorious New England art thief Miles J. Connor Jr. spoke with authorities. Connor was in jail at the time of the heist, so we can rule him out. But he suspected Bobby D and criminal David Houghton were the masterminds behind the heist. Connor claimed that he worked with Bobby D in previous art heists, and that the two went to the Gardner Museum together to stake out the joint, but Bobby D was really interested in robbing the place. Connor also claimed that after the heist, Houghton visited him in jail and told him that him and Bobby D planned it and they were going to get the paintings to get Connor out of jail. And if this was true, they most likely stole this idea from Connor himself, because Connor had previously returned stolen artwork to get his sentence short. Connor suspected, since the eyewitness statements didn't match Houghton and Bobby D's appearances, the two just contracted the job out to some lower level gangsters. But within 2 years of the robbery, both Houghton and Bobby D were dead. Houghton had died from some illness, but Bobby D was abducted when he was leaving his home, and his body was found later beaten and stabbed to death. His death remains unsolved, I guess just as this heist does to this day. John Doe 24. Look, I know the section's shorter than the previous, and not because I don't want to talk about this, but there's just less information to report on, which in this particular person, it's kind of sad. John Doe 24 was a name given to a deaf and later blind man who was committed to a mental institution in Jacksonville, Illinois. John Doe 24 was believed to have been born in 1929, and from 1929 to 1945, we really have no information on him. But on October 11, 1945, two police officers discovered a black adolescent wandering the streets of Jacksonville, Illinois. He was quickly diagnosed as deaf and incapable of communicating. When asked why he was roaming the streets, all he could write was Lewis, which was thought to be his name. There was no information available about him or his relatives. Unable to communicate, the deaf and mute teenager was labeled feeble-minded and sentenced by a judge to a nightmarish jumble of the Lincoln State School and Colony in Jacksonville. He became known as John Doe 24 because he was the 24th unidentified man in the state's mental health care system. His name was later legally changed to John Doe Boyd in 1978 to allow him to apply for Social Security. During his time in the mental institutions, he slowly became blind. The man's caretakers believed that his diabetes eventually took his eyesight, and his records indicate that he was mentally deficient. But workers at Smiley Living Center, where he spent the last 6 years of his life, remember a proud and more intelligent man that the standardized test proved on paper. He wore a straw hat and carried a backpack containing a collection of rings, glasses, and silverware with him everywhere. And he danced to vibrations at the Christmas parties. He apparently loved music and dancing, despite being deaf. Sadly, on November 28, 1993, he passed away due to a stroke at an estimated age of 64. When Mary Chapman Carpenter, an American singer, learned of Doe's life, she purchased a tombstone and placed it over his unmarked grave. Carpenter also wrote a song named John Doe 24, which appeared on the album Stones in the Road, which released in October of 1994. This one's a sad story where it seems like a sweet man just disappeared and no one from his life either knew or cared enough to come find him. Evil Stick Creator. Evil Stick Creator refers to the Evil Stick toy that was found in Daytona, Ohio in 2014. On that day, Nicole Allen bought a toy for her 2-year-old daughter the week after Halloween at a dollar store. The toy was a princess wand topped with flower petals, packaged in a cardboard box with a smiling female and a recommendation for ages 3 and up. According to the box, the toy could send out wonderful music. It appeared nothing more than just cheap toy, kind of thing that you would, pass through a dollar store and just throw in the buggy, to give to your little cousin or your child, obviously. Alan, though, didn't notice the name up top that said, Evil Stick. But when she got home, she found out why. It was called Evil Stick. Pushing the button activated, the toy, which produced this really evil laugh, which sounded even, more scary since it came out of this dollar store speaker. But when you press the button, the toy's little flower up top had an illuminating, piece of foil, and it became transparent, and it revealed this really scary image of a woman mimicking the act of her wrist. The toy would be scary if you weren't expecting it, especially when you consider it was made for children. Alan complained that she even contacted the local news, and the story went viral in 2014. Questions still persist though years later. Who designed it? Was this cheap toy the act of bootlegging or something more sinister? Well, as we all know, dollar stores, they get cheap knockoff toys from China. And at first, that's what this appeared to be. The dollar store owner was named Amar Mustafa, and he recalled being sold the inventory in 2012, but he didn't remember who sold it to him. A freelance journalist named Matt Clark lived in the area, so said, hell, I'm gonna go to the store and try to buy one myself, see what I find. Well, turns out, according to him, after inspecting some of the evil sticks, not all of them had the woman, committing the act of self-delete. Others had photos of zombies, but most had nothing. Clark then made an 11-second video showing off the toy. Funny side note, he made the video, it blew up, and then he didn't post anything for years. People thought that the evil stick was cursed and killed him. God, I love the internet. Turns out, unsurprisingly, the evil stick didn't kill him, but he just thought it was funny that people thought this toy killed him, so he decided not to post for a while because I wouldn't either. There are two main theories on how this product made it to shelves though. The first being that it was intentionally made this way in some factory in China. Clark said he contacted the manufacturer and he talked to a few people, but eventually they didn't get back with him and the trail went cold. The second theory is that, it was product manipulation. Some guy just went in there and just thought it'd be funny to mess with some toys, scare some kids. It was possible that someone planted a gory image in a young child's toy to either be a nuisance or to spin a new urban legend, similar to the poisoned Halloween candy we hear every year. Today, the barcode doesn't trigger any company of origin if you try to look it up that way. It seems like the evil stick just swooped in, terrorized a small group of children, and disappeared without a trace. What a legend. Gil Perez. Gil Perez refers to a soldier in 1593 of the Spanish Empire who reportedly teleported thousands of miles. According to folklore, in October 1593, a soldier from the Spanish Empire named Gil Perez, in the 1908 version, was mysteriously transported from Manila in the Philippines to Mexico City's Plaza Mayor. Sorry if I butcher these names and these locations. On October 24th, 1593, a soldier was guarding the Palacio del Gobernador in Manila the night before Chinese pirates assassinated the governor, but the guards still guarded the palace and awaited appointment for the new governor. One of the soldiers felt dizzy and exhausted. He leaned against the wall and closed his eyes for one moment. When he opened his eyes again, He was in Mexico City, thousands of miles across the ocean. Some of the guards noticed that, he was wearing the wrong uniform and began wondering who he was. Obviously wearing the wrong clothes, he stuck out. You see, people in Mexico City were still unaware of the assassination of the governor of the Philippines. The soldier who was wearing the uniform of the people who would be guarding near the now assassinated governor was aware of his death and began telling them that the governor was dead. And he also told them, "Where am I at? How did I get here? I was just there in the Philippines." The authorities placed him in jail for being a deserter. And due to apparently the teleportation, they also charged him with being a servant of the devil. Soon ships arrived from the Philippines and it brought news of the governor's death to Mexico months later. One of the passengers recognized the imprisoned soldier and claimed to have seen him in the Philippines the day after the governor's death. Remember, this is 1593. There's not planes where you can just travel thousands of miles across the ocean like that. This takes weeks, months. Since he had someone vouching for him, the authorities eventually let him out of jail and allowed him to return home. All this sounds crazy. Is there any historical documentation of it? Kinda. In December 1908, in the issue of the Harper's Magazine, Thomas Jambier, an American folklorist living in Mexico, recounted the story as Legend of the Living Spectra, naming the soldier Gil Perez. The story was a part of a collection called The Legends of the City of Mexico, which was published in 1910. But the story of Gil Perez was also called The Governor Manico and the Soldier, from Washington Irving's story in 1832. And their story and the story about Gil are very similar. Jambier in 1908, who named this soldier Gil, based his on a Spanish version by a Mexican folklorist named Luis Gonzalez Obregon, who published his work in 1900. Obregon traces his story back to a 1698 account of the Spanish conquest of the Philippines, which they recount this story as fact. However, that story never names the soldier and describes his transportation as witchcraft. Several authors have proposed supernatural explanations for the story. Some have suggested teleportation, others think alien abduction. But what do you think? Is there something supernatural to this case, or is it just a tall tale? Comment down below what you think. The Mad Gasser of Mattoon. The Mad Gasser of Mattoon was a name given to a person or a group of people suspected of carrying out a series of apparent gas attacks in Mattoon, Illinois in the mid-1940s. On August 31st, 1944, the first of the Gasser incidents occurred at a house on Grant Avenue in Mattoon. That night, a strange odor woke up the resident, Urban Rafe, in the early hours of the morning. He was nauseated and was weak, and he just started vomiting. Rafe's wife then woke up, and maybe she thought, well, maybe it's the kitchen pilot light. Maybe there's something going on with that, the gas leak there. But she realized she was partially paralyzed and unable to leave her bed, suspecting that they may, be subject to some sort of gas poisoning. Later that night, a young mother living nearby also reported a very similar incident. The sound of her daughter woke her up in the middle of the night, but she was unable to get out of bed to go check on her. And the third incident was reported the following day on September 1st. Around 11 p.m., Mrs. Kearney of Marshall Avenue reported a strong smell with a sweet odor. She dismissed it at first, thinking it was just some flowers outside of her window, but the odor began to get stronger, and she began losing feeling in her legs. Mrs. Kearney panicked, and she began calling out, which drew the attention of her sister, Miss Reddy, who was at the house at the time. Miss Reddy also noticed the odor and determined it was coming from the direction of the open bedroom window. The cops were called, but there was no evidence of anyone outside. Bert Kearney, Mrs. Kearney's husband, was a local taxi driver, and he was absent during the attack, but he returned home around 12:30 a.m. and he found an unidentified man hiding close outside of his windows. He was unable to apprehend him because the guy, as soon as he saw him, fled. But the prowler described by Mr. Kearney was a tall man dressed in dark clothing and wearing a tight-fitting cap. The description was widely publicized in the local news, and it became the standard description for the gasser for the rest of the attacks. Mrs. Kearney also reported a burning sensation on her lips and throat following the attack, which was attributed to, the effects of the gas. The primary motive was initially suspected as robbery. The Kearneys had a large sum of money in the house at the time, and it was suspected that the prowler may have saw Mrs. Kearney and her sister counting it earlier that evening. Local newspapers misidentified this as the first attack of the gasser, even though looking back on it, there were those other 3 incidents I described prior. There were half a dozen similar attacks following the days after Mrs. Kearney's attack, though none of the victims could provide any description of the alleged prowler, and no clues were left behind at the scenes. The first physical evidence was found on September 5th when Carl and Beulah Cords of North 21st Street returned home around 10 p.m. They noticed a white cloth slightly larger than a man's handkerchief sitting on their porch next to the screen door. Beulah Cords picked it up and smelled the cloth and became violently ill as soon as she inhaled. She described the sensation as like an electric shock. Her face swelled quickly and she felt a burning sensation in her mouth and throat, and then she vomited. She, like the other victims, reported feeling weak and having partial paralysis in her legs. Beulah Cords later speculated that the cloth was left on the porch to frighten the family dog, who usually slept there, so the prowler could enter the house unnoticed. The same night, a second incident was reported on North 13th Street at Mrs. Leonard Burrell's home. She claimed to witness a stranger break in through her bedroom window and attempt to gas her. Concerns grew quickly, and the FBI got involved. Local police issued a statement urging residents to avoid lingering in residential areas and warning of groups who formed a search for the gasser. They should be disbanded for safety reasons. The chief of police, C.E. Cole, also warned of concerned citizens to use caution when carrying or discharging firearms. They tried to go Halloween 2021 on his ass. During this time, there was allegedly more physical evidence found during the attacks. From footprints to alleged tearing in the screens from the gasser trying to get in, the reports of this evidence was up. By September 12th, local police received so many false alarms, mostly from citizens who thought they smelled gas or saw a prowler, that they reduced the priority given to the gas reports and declared that the entire incident was likely the result of explainable occurrences that were just made worse by the public fears in the newspapers as a sign of anxiety, since it was mostly women and most of the men were away for the war effort. After the police announcement, the gas reports declined, and the only incident that's worth mentioning is the incident of Bertha Birch, who claimed to assault the gasser was a woman dressed as a man. There are 4 main explanations for the Mattoon mad gasser: mass hysteria, industrial pollution, actual assailant, or the paranormal. We'll go over the first one first. Mass hysteria. Almost 2 weeks after the Mattoon gas attacks, the local commissioner of public health, Thomas V. Wright, declared that there undoubtedly have been some gas attacks, but the vast majority of these incidents were hysteria. Residents were being alarmed, and anytime they saw a shadow out of place or any kind of funny odor, they just immediately assumed they were being gassed. And on September 12th, local police chief C.E. Cole expanded on that hypothesis, declaring that there most likely been no gas attacks at all, and that the reported incidents had been triggered by chemicals carried from the wind from nearby local industrial facilities, and then just became heightened by the public panic. Wright and Cole's diagnosis gained credence in 1945 when Donald M. Johnson published Phantom and Thesis of Mattoon, a field study of mass hysteria, in the Journal of Abnormal and Social Psychology, which documented the Mattoon incident as a case study for mass hysteria. The majority of the physical symptoms observed during the Mattoon gassings were choking, mucous membrane swelling, weakness, temporary paralysis. They've all been linked to mass hysteria. And some experts believe that the headline that the original article for the local newspaper published, Mrs. Kearney and her daughter, first victims, fueled mass hysteria by implying that there would be more victims. Enough of that. Second theory was the toxic waste. Like I said, on September 12th, the chief of police mentioned something about pollutants from a local industrial facility nearby. They got just caught up in the wind. Well, some of the pollutants that they thought could have done it was carbon tetrachloride or trichloroethylene. Both have a sweet odor and cause symptoms very similar to all from the incidents reported. In response to these accusations, Atlas Imperial, the primary company involved in this matter, issued a statement that the company only had 5 gallons of these chemicals I mentioned, and they were used for firefighting. They were very well regulated. They also said that if any of their chemicals had gotten out and it was that bad that the wind could push it to the nearby town, it obviously would have affected their workers, and this was not happening at their plant. And the Atlas plant had been certified by the State Department of Health at the time of the gassing. So in my opinion, I don't think this was the cause. The next theory is that there was an actual gasser. After analyzing some of the events, some researchers concluded that at least some of the gasser incidents were a work of an actual attacker who carried out a series of gassings that were reported by witnesses. No one really knows who could have been behind it, but one theory from Scott Maruna, who wrote The Mad Gasser of Mattoon, Dispelling the Hysteria, says that it could have been Farley Llewellyn. According to Maruna, Farley drank excessively, but kept a secret laboratory and experimented with various chemicals. In fact, an explosion from his lab once shook the whole neighborhood. Dude sounds like an early version of Greenball Rick. Maruna states that, quote, Farley, the obvious chemical genius responsible for the gas creations, was the true gasser. Farley tinkered and toyed with various organic solvents in an attempt to create a suitable weapon, fueled by the mental instability of years of pent-up rage against a town that would not accept him. End quote. Maruna even goes as far to identify Farley's chemical as tetrachloroethane, a chemical that has all the properties necessary for all the symptoms of the gas. In my opinion, solid theory. Not for the last, but the best, the paranormal. Some authors have blamed the gassings on something that's not quite human. Possibility of some sort of extraterrestrial origin, some extraterrestrial being responsible for being the gasser. Clearly, it's the strongest theory on the list. Joking aside, in my opinion, I believe mass hysteria is probably the most likely explanation for this. But what do you think? Comment down below. Man of the Hole. The Man of the Hole, or the Chinaru Indian, was an indigenous person who lived alone in the Amazon rainforest in the Brazilian state of Rondônia. He was the sole occupant of the Chinaru Indigenous Territory, a Brazilian government-designated protected indigenous territory established in 2007. That's a tongue twister. It's unclear what language the Man of the Hole spoke, what his people were called, or even what his name was. He was the last survivor of his people's genocide by Brazilian settlers in the 1970s and the 1990s, and he chose to live alone until his death in 2022. Living primarily through hunting and gathering, and frequently moving, he left a deep hole for some unknown purpose in each one of his previous homes, giving rise to his nickname, Man of the Hole. He was discovered dead in his home in August 2022. After surviving another attack by armed ranchers in 2009. The Man of the Hole was not a voluntary recluse. He was forced to live alone after his people were destroyed in Brazil's ongoing indigenous genocide. The majority of his people were thought to be massacred by the settlers in the 1970s. And apart from the Man of the Hole, the remaining survivors were then killed and attacked by illegal miners in 1995. The remains of the village were then bulldozed in 1996, but were later discovered by the Fundação Nacional de Índio, or FUNAI, Brazil's government agency for indigenous interests. FUNAI first became aware of the isolated existence of the Man of the Hole in 1996. They noticed that he moved his home on a regular basis, extracting straw huts for shelter. FUNAI identified more than 50 huts that he'd built over the years. And like I said, his nickname was derived from a deep hole they found in each one of his abandoned homes. Originally, they thought the holes were used to trap animals, but some observers began to believe that it may have some sort of spiritual significance. The holes were narrow and about 5 feet 11 inches deep. According to Brazil's constitution, the indigenous people have the right to the lands that they traditionally occupy. So FUNAI designated 31 square miles for this Man of the Hole. Following the establishment of this area, FUNAI closely monitored him and attempted to prevent, intrusions into his area, trying to keep people away from him, let him do his thing. Despite this, the Man of the Hole was ambushed by gunmen in November 2009, but thankfully he survived. And in 2018, FUNAI released a video of him to raise global awareness of the threats to Brazil's uncontacted peoples. The man who appeared in the video, he seemed like he was in his 50s and appeared to be in good health. But unfortunately, the Man of the Hole was found dead in his home on August 24, 2022 by a FUNAI agent. There were no signs of violence or disturbance, and they expect he died sometime in July at the approximately age of 60 years old. Count Saint Germain. The Count of Saint Germain was a European adventurer who was fascinated by science, alchemy, and the arts. He rose to prominence in the mid-19th century in the European high society. Quote, he was one of the greatest philosophers who ever lived, end quote, according to Prince Charles of Hesse-Kassel. Saint Germain used various titles and names throughout his life, which was very common among royalty and nobility at the time. To deflect questions about his origins, he would make outlandish claims like being 500 years old, prompting Voltaire to sarcastically refer to him as the Wonder Man, and that he is a wonder man who does not die and knows everything. His real name is unknown, his birth is unknown, his family history is unknown, but he claimed at the end of his life that he was the son of Prince Francis of Transylvania. His name has occasionally been confused with Claude Louis, Comte Saint Germain, a well-known French general. The Count claimed to be the son of Francis II Rákóczi, the Prince of Transylvania, which may or may not be true. However, it would explain his wealth and his excellent education. Prince Francis' will mentions his eldest son, Leopold George, who was thought to have died at the age of 4. It's speculated that his identity was protected as a safeguard against the persecution of some rival ruling families. Saint Germain arrived in Schleswig in 1779, where he met Prince Charles of Hesse-Kassel, who was also interested in mysticism and a member of several secret societies. The Count then displayed some gems to the prince and convinced him that he had a new method of coloring cloth. The prince was impressed with Count Saint Germain, so he bought him a factory, gave him all the materials and tooling that he could ask for, where they collaborated on creations of gemstones and jewelry and other items that he made. In a later letter, the prince recalls that he was the only person who the Count truly trusted and could tell his real story to. And that's when he informed the prince that he was the son of the Transylvanian prince. The Count then died a few years later in his factory on February 27, 1784, while the prince was away. If you want a deeper dive into Count Saint Germain's life and theories, I'll link the Y-Files video down below. I think they did a 2-part video series on him, where they dove in deep and went to the conspiracies. Very good video, I highly recommend it. Love the channel. Green Boots. Green Boots is the name given to an unidentified body of a climber that became a landmark on the main northeast ridge route on Mount Everest. The body has not been officially identified, but is believed to be Tshewang Paljor, an Indian climber who died on Everest in 1996. The term green boots originated from his green mountaineering boots that he wore when he passed. All expeditions up the mountain from the north side have encountered his body since he died up until 2014, when it was moved to a limestone cave. In May 1996, British filmmaker and climber Matt Dickinson captured the first video footage of Green Boot, and over time the corpse became known as a landmark and became very popular due to its connection with David Sharp's death. As I've stated, most believe Green Boots to be Tshewang Paljor, an Indian climber who attempted to climb the mountain in 1996. And if it's not him, it's most likely a member of his group that he was with that day. May 10th and 11th, 1996, which is now known as the 1996 Mount Everest disaster, 8 climbers died. On the southeast route, there were 5 fatalities from Adventure Consultant and Mountain Madness Expedition, and 3 fatalities were on the northeast side, which is where Green Boots is. Climbers on the northeast route were from India's Indo-Tibetan Border Police, or the ITBP, and this is the expedition that Green Boots was a part of. And it was actually one of Indians' first ascents of the Everest from the east side. On May 10, 1996, the Indian group attempted their climb, but they got caught in a blizzard just short of the summit. 3 members decided to turn around, while 3 members decided to go forward. The 3 men who marched forward ultimately did reach the summit, and they radioed down their success, but they never made it down alive, and no more radio contact was made from them once they began descending. While it's widely assumed that Green Boots is the body of head constable Tshewang Paljor, a 1997 article titled The Indian Ascent of Kolmogula by the North Ridge, published in the Himalayan Journal by Deputy Expedition Leader P.M. Das, raises the possibility that the body is Dorje Morup, aka Dorje. Green Boots, though, is about 1 of 200 corpses that are still on Everest, and it's unknown when Green Boots first appeared as like Everest slang. It's assumed since there's so many expeditions past the body that it just became a common term among the hikers. The mountain is littered with bodies from Sleeping Beauty to the Rainbow Valley, which is an area below the summit strewn with corpses wearing brightly colored mountaineering apparel. It's kind of creepy to think about that. The Durban Hospital Ceiling Man. The Durban Hospital Ceiling Man refers to a South African patient who mysteriously left his hospital bed undetected with a broken leg and was found dead in the hospital ceiling. Not gonna lie, I've only recently heard about this case when Mr. Ballad covered it back in December of 2022. Great video. Check it out when you're done with mine. Anyway, Sendil Simbaya arrived at Durban's Mahatma Gandhi Memorial Hospital on May 10th with a broken femur. You know, the femur is the upper part of your leg, and when that's broken, you're not walking. Keep that in mind. But just as Sendil is about to be transferred to a nearby hospital, he vanished. But this hospital had great security, and they haven't noticed a patient hobbling around, so they called the police. But they too couldn't find Sendil. 6 days later, on May 18th, the hospital began to smell horrible. It smelled like death. They tracked it down to a small janitor's closet. That's where the staff noticed this dark black liquid just dripping from the ceiling tile. So they climbed up there to see what was the source of this smell, what was the source of this liquid. Well, it was Sendil's body. It was decomposing, and he'd somehow made it into the ceiling with a broken femur. Undetected, might I add, and then died there. But you know, the craziest thing though, 2 years prior to this incident, also in South Africa, but at a different hospital, something extremely similar happened. In 2017, Tatiki Grotsky was found dead in the Stellenbosch hospital. Just like Stendhal, Tatiki was in no condition to walk. He was also found dead in the ceiling while being undetected, with even reports that the hospital staff was just outside his room at the time of his disappearance. This means in the span of 2 years, 2 patients in South African hospitals slipped away undetected and then were ultimately found dead in the hospital ceiling. Some believe the men did sneak out on their own accord and climbed in the ceiling and just died there. Others think that they were murdered and then their bodies were hidden there by the murderer or murderers. Final theory is that they were best examples of spontaneous human transportation, which is where someone instantly teleports from one location to another. But for now, we don't know. You decide. What do you think? Comment down below. Boy in the box. The boy in the box was an American 4-year-old who was found dead, naked, and beaten to death out of a box on the side of a road in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania on February 25th, 1957. His body appeared cleaned and freshly groomed, with a recent haircut and trimmed fingernails, although he did suffer physical abuse before his death and had multiple bruises on his body. He was also severely malnourished. The body was covered with scars, some of which even appeared surgical. Authorities believe his cause of death was homicide by blunt force trauma. Despite the publicity and interest throughout the years, the boy's identity remained unknown for over half a century. The police originally took his fingerprints in 1957 and was hoping someone would come forward and claim the body or give information or do anything, but no one ever did. And in 1998, the body was exhumed to extract DNA. And even in 2016, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children released a facial reconstruction, all in efforts to identify this poor child. Theories about who this child was range from being involved with a local foster home down the road where he was murdered to hide a child born out of wedlock, all the way to theories about him being bought by a couple just for the purpose of being murdered. There was even a theory about the boy in the box was actually raised to be a girl prior to his death, but all these leads had turned up nothing after investigating. But I can say, as November 30th, 2022, the boy in the box may not need to be on this iceberg anymore. After 65 years of investigating, police had a name thanks to DNA. The boy in the box was Joseph Augustus Zarelli. The Philadelphia Police Department announced that they had identified the child through the use of genetic testing and investigative genetic genealogy. Sources stated that the child was from a prominent family in the Delaware County area in Pennsylvania. And on December 8th, 2022, the child was publicly identified as 4-year-old Joseph Augustus Zarelli, born on January 13th, 1953. And on January 19, 2023, the names of Zarelli's parents were reported. Investigators were finally able to identify him after a cousin uploaded DNA to a public database. Investigators subsequently encouraged the person's mother, first cousin of Zarelli, to submit a genetic profile, which she did, allowing investigators to identify his parents. Then that's how they got a court order to get a birth certificate and got the names of the child and the parents. But on December 2022, a press conference by the Philadelphia Police Department said that Joseph's death is still an active homicide and that they still needed public's help to identify what happened and why. Law enforcement reported that both of his parents were now deceased, but the child still has some living half-siblings. Monsieur Chouchani. Monsieur Chouchani is an anonymous, mysterious Jewish teacher with students in the land of Israel, South America, post-World War II Europe, and elsewhere. Not much is known about Chouchani, including his real name, a secret he kept very close. His origins are completely unknown, and his gravestone reads, "The wise Rabbi Chouchani, blessed memory, his birth and life are sealed in enigma." The name Chouchani refers to the person of Shushan, and is most likely an allegorical reference or possibly a pun. Elia Wiesel, a prominent American author, political analyst, and Holocaust survivor, hypothesizes that Chouchani's real name was Mordechai Rosenbaum, while Hebrew University professor Shalom Rosenberg asserts that Chouchani's actual name was Hillel Perlman. An article published by Yale Levine in 2015, based on genealogical research, brought documentation supporting the view that Chouchani was none other than Perlman, a native of Poland. Although there's no body of work by Chouchani himself, his influence on his pupil leaves a very strong intellectual legacy. Chouchani had the appearance of a vagabond, or a bum, but was said to be a master of vast areas of human knowledge, including science, mathematics, philosophy. The majority of Chouchani's biological details are unknown from the works and interviews of his various students, as well as anecdotes of the people he met during his lifetime. Chouchani first appeared in Paris after World War II, where he began teaching from 1947 to 1952. He went missing for a while after that and evidently spent some time in the newly formed state of Israel, and then briefly returned to Paris and then left for South America, where he died. Very hard to find information on him. Basically, to sum it up, he looked like a bum on the outside, but he was this very prominent, very smart Jewish teacher. So like, while you look at him, you're like, this guy's just a bum, what does he know? And he would just spew all these deep thoughts. The Poe Toaster. Poe Toaster is a media nickname given to an unidentified person, or possibly more than one person in succession, who has paid annual tribute to the American author Edgar Allan Poe by visiting his original grave in Baltimore, Maryland in the early hours of January 19th, which is Poe's birthday. And this went on for decades. The shadowy figure, dressed in black with a wide brim hat and white scarf, would enter in the grave area every year. He'd pour a glass of cognac and offer a toast in place of Poe's original tomb, which was marked by commemorative stone. He would then leave the unfinished bottle of cognac and arrange 3 red flowers in a specific position on the memorial. The roses were thought to represent Poe, his wife Virginia, and his mother-in-law Maria Clem, who were all buried near the spot. The cognac meaning is unknown, and it doesn't really appear in any of Poe's work. Nonetheless, a note left during the 2004 visitation suggested that the cognac may have represented a family tradition of the Poe Toaster rather than the Poes themselves. Several of these bottles are maintained at Baltimore's Edgar Allan Poe House and Museum. The elusive toaster, who did not seek publicity, was rarely ever seen or photographed. Despite that, every year, a number of reporters and Poe fans attended the event. Life magazine allegedly released a photo of the toaster in 1990. According to eyewitness testimonies and notes accompanying contributions in later years, the original toaster made annual visitation from somewhere in the 1930s, though no report appeared until the 1950s, until his death in 1998, after which the practice was handed to a son. How do we know he died and passed it to a son if we don't know who he is? Well, the toaster left a message with the roses in the bottles on many occasions. Several of the notes were straightforward with comments such as, "Edgar, I haven't forgotten you. The torch shall be handed," said a cryptic statement in 1993. But in 1999, one of the messages said the original toaster had died the previous year, and the practice had been passed on to a son. And eyewitnesses afterwards noticed that the post-1998 toaster appeared to be a younger person. But some controversial letters were expressed in some of the notes left by the 1998 toaster, and there was an unsuccessful attempt to capture and identify the man in 2006. One of the notes left in 2004 was critical of France's objection to the Iraq War, saying, quote, "The sacred memory of Poe in his final resting place is no place for French cognac. With great reluctance, for respect for family tradition, the cognac is placed. The memory of Poe shall live evermore." Former Poe House and Museum curator Jeff Jerome has speculated that the 2001 and 2004 notes may have indicated the son or sons' unwillingness to take the tradition as seriously as the father had. The final note left between 2005 and 2008 was so upsetting that Jerome said he'd choose to lie and just said there were no notes left that year. He refuses to share the content of these notes, other than that it was foreshadowing that the end of the tradition was near. And then the toaster did not appear in 2010, 2011, and 2012, which kind of signaled the end of this 75-year-old tradition. However, fortunately in 2016, the Maryland Historical Society selected a new toaster to revive the tradition. Grave robbing for Morons guy. Grave robbing for Morons guy refers to a possible self-taught grave robber who recorded instructions on how to commit grave robbery. The video itself is even called Grave Robbery for Morons, and it was first found on a DVD called Ensuring Your Place in Hell, and the full video is around 27 minutes long and can be found easily online. It appears that it was recorded on some sort of film in either the 80s or the 90s. And the star of the video refers to himself as Anthony and keeps referring to his cameraman buddy as Gino. Anthony appears to be some Hispanic male in his 20s, and both people in the film have a New York accent. In the video, which I'll play clips of because I think it's best seen than described, I feel like you'll understand a little bit more. Anthony can be seen holding a skull, and explaining what is needed to commit grave robbery. He goes into details such as how many people will you need? What tools will you need? How to clean the remains? How to sell the remains? What will you get for different parts? And as he explains the cleaning method, he even goes into details such as putting bleach on the bones will make them become brittle and weak. This is factual. That plus the detail on the skull he's holding makes me feel that this video is authentic. The skull seems to still have some tissue and hair present, and the way that some of the bones are fused makes it seem very authentic. In my opinion, this seems like an amateur grave robber who is explaining how he robs graves and is trying to explain his process in case others want to take up this horrible action. Interesting enough though, to this day, we don't know who Anthony is or even who made or shared this video. And maybe we never will. Well, guys, that wraps it up for Tier 3. And if you stayed this long, I just want to thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. I'll be uploading part 4 soon. There's going to be 6 parts total. So please come back if you want to see more. Have a wonderful day, and just know, I love you all.